Okay, I wanted to start off this week talking a little bit. We've used the phrase in the past of playing in the text, and I want to talk about that a little bit. I was thinking about that, or I've been thinking about it a lot over the past year or so. And I wanted to share some of my ideas and hear some of your ideas about that. So, when I think about playing in the text, there a different sort of like imagery of relation to scripture, an idea has come to my mind recently. Um, I've heard of like the Bible being described as a library, like a bunch of separate books, but one big book. But starting to think of a slightly different idea of the Bible as an art museum. And that when we visit an art museum and we look at a piece of art, or it could also be like even listening to a piece of music, maybe a song with lyrics that are just vague enough that you don't know explicitly what the artist is trying to say sometimes. But when we go to an art museum and we observe art, we sometimes feel, especially if it's abstract, you can feel more free to imagine what the artist might have been thinking. Um, and last week we talked about the Statue of Liberty and being a statue, and we had a great shortened discussion, but we made a lot of assumptions about the Statue of Liberty, and we imagined what does it mean that the statue's right foot is in motion, or like actually the whole right leg is in motion. It's, even though it's a statue and we think of a statue as stationary, the foot is crafted and the leg is crafted to be showing movement. And we got to explore what that might mean. And when we did that, we could have opened up the floodgates and said, what could possibly a foot moving mean? But we also had boundaries within knowing what the artist's intent was and knowing what we knew about the other imagery that we saw in the statue to guide our discussion. So when we started talking about the foot, nobody said that, well, this foot is moving so it can stomp on a bunch of people and kill them. Nobody jumped to that conclusion because we were equipped. We were grounded in what we knew. We know it's called the Statue of Liberty. We know that the artist had the intent of magnifying freedom and facing the oppressors. And actually, even this week, as I was revisiting some of the imagery and other resources, I found an interesting tidbit that actually the statue was kind of a subliminal message to the French government, who was placing many restrictions on their people at the time. So there was also this other undercurrent of what the artist was experiencing. And I know that Craig had shared that video, the Ghostbuster video, the statue stomping around. So that was hilarious. This is not a rebuke, Craig, on you. But yeah, so, and the torch, a symbol of resistance, the chains of slavery broken around the statue's feet, or the chains broken around the feet that many people think about chains of slavery being broken, the 7 pillars or 7 spikes of the crown symbolizing the 7 continents. We have this imagery that guided our discussion about the work of art. And I think that we can approach the text the same way, that we can have this freedom to play and imagine what could possibly the text be saying, as long as we stay within the boundaries of what we know to be true, that our musings are fitting with God's character as evidence throughout scripture and even throughout history and throughout our personal experiences, because I don't want to downplay even our personal experiences with God. That's an important part of how God is revealed to us. So the experiences we have of God as ourselves and in our community, and the experiences that we see God in the text, when we're interpreting the text, we can remember all that and guide our interpretation. and that sometimes we get limited or even dangerous ideas by looking at the text and only interpreting it to be what it literally says in whatever translation that you happen to choose, and what that literal saying is coming into your mind, into your experiences. So when we read the text, we carry all these filters of our own experiences. And if I see a word in a certain order in the translation I happen to pick up that day, I could apply a lot more value to that if I'm not careful to reference other translations or read the scripture in community, to talk about it in community like we do on Sunday mornings. So, yeah, I like to talk pretty literally, and specifically and efficiently. So I like to see that in the text, and it's something that I'm growing out of. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit today and preface what I'm going to be going into. But before I go into some playing in the text, I wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts so far.
I have actually quite a few thoughts on that, Sarah. One of them is I don't know if I can make the assumption that a lot of us are coming from the same place when we look at the text in terms of what's we know to be true and what we don't. So you were mentioning earlier that there are some certain things that we all kind of agree on, and I'm not even sure if we do that. Give you an example. This week I was listening to a podcast, and the podcast, just on a side reference, mentioned human depravity and sin. And over the years, I have come to just completely disagree with that foundational type of approach to the text that a lot of evangelicals take. I just don't see it in the text. And I guess if you wanted my proof text, is if you go back to Genesis, when God created humanity, he said it was very good. And I've never seen any place in the text where God has actually rescinded that. So obviously God has been very saddened by the course of humanity and sin in humanity. Thus, the flood came along. And there's been obviously many other places in the text where God has been saddened by human behavior and human sin, but I've never ever seen God rescinding the fact that when he made us fundamentally good. I mean, if you want to see the same course, when he created nature, created the birds, he created he just the fundamental creation, he said it was good. I don't think any of us would rescind that particular notion, but for whatever reason, we rescind the fact that God created humanity and he said it was very good. So I don't think a lot of Christians come from that premise. And sometimes I'm almost reluctant to even bring that up in conversation because I don't want it to be a stumbling block. And it is for a lot of people. So you have that. And the other part of that, I guess, is that I feel like American Christians are very ethnocentric in our approach to the text. It was written by an Eastern culture, and Eastern culture thinks fundamentally different than we do here in the West. Give you an example of that. So in our Bible study last week, we were looking at the beginning of Numbers, and when we started studying that, people get really hung up on those numbers and if they were exact or not. Right. Okay, and in the Eastern mind, it was never meant to be exact, and yet we get hung up on that, and so we do the mathematics, and the mathematics don't add up, and we get all hung up on that. So, playing with the text, I love to play with the text. I love the mystery of the text. I love it when somebody brings up a teaching or something, and it makes me think and change my mind about a position I hold. But I'm always amazed on how I guess in a lot of ways I just don't agree sometimes particularly with the evangelical approach to the text. I just see it differently. So anyway, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. I think one of the things that stood out to me in what you were sharing was sometimes you don't even bring up your viewpoint because you don't want it to be a stumbling block. And I think that it's a hard road to navigate, but that is like the hard work of maturity to figure out when is a discussion going to be fruitful, or and when is it not, even though I agree with what you were saying, and I love hearing your viewpoint, and your backup text to defend your viewpoint. um I think that that's awesome. And I think when I was saying like playing in the text and stopping to catch to see if it's what we know to be true. And even as I said that, it felt weird. So maybe I chose the wrong words, because I think that's might be what you were honing in on in your first point. Um, because I agree with you, like what we know to be true, like you said, sometimes what I know to be true is true until I hear somebody else bring another part of truth, and then it changes what I knew to be true. Um, in my thoughts for today, what I know to be true is that God is good and loving. And that's like as broad, and like, I know that's extremely broad. And that's kind of like where I was thinking and imagining about that if, and also that as we play in the text, that we can do the work that you've done on the human depravity issue of looking in the text ourselves to see, okay, well, this truth that people have talked about is not sitting right with me. So can I look in the text and find what are the texts that people who are holding this truth are holding, and can I look into those, and what are the texts that I know, and how do I hear that coming to me as um I just try to love God more and love people more. That's one thing that we can do. um, I think the freedom and the idea of playing in the text, especially in a community where we're safe to do so, we feel safe to do so, is that even like um, this morning when I share my example of playing in the text, there's going to be probably some things that aren't going to make sense to some people, or our people would have like arguments against it, and that's like the point of the discussion, is to get those points to come out, and that freedom. And your second point about getting hung up on numbers is actually um, leads into what I was going to be, not exactly what I was going to be talking about today too, but again, this idea, it's almost like the 50,000-foot view, or the bird's eye view, or the fly on the wall. Not like, I'm going to be talking about a huge analogy of the narrative of Abraham and the Exodus. That if we break it down, the analogy, and we take the analogy too exact and try to figure out a piece that fits every part of the analogy, then the analogy just starts to fall apart. But is the analogy useless? I mean, my argument is that the analogy is playing in the text, and comparing it to the art museum. I think that a lot of artists would delight in knowing that people are talking about their works, and and exploring those ideas. And I think that's what God delights in, us looking at the text and exploring the text and talking about it in community, and even pushing back on each other when we don't necessarily agree, or something doesn't quite work. But I think that I remember back when we were talking about the parables and we were meeting in at Collingwood in person, and I tried to bring up a point, and I don't remember if it came out jumbled or if it actually made sense, but the parables, and Don talking to us about how the parables are surprising, and there's aspects of surprise, but you can also start to imagine, like, well, who are we imagining to be the characters in the parables? But we can also go too far with that assigning in parables, to thinking of getting so deep into the details that we're almost making it like it's a realistic thing, that every detail can be analyzed for meaning. And you can almost go too far down that rabbit trail and lose the big picture artistry of the story or the poem. Poetry being another example of this, that like if we go too far down the rabbit trail and get too hung up on details, then the whole thing could fall apart. Not really fall apart, but we lose the beauty of the big picture. Do you have any comments? I was trying to comment back on some of what you were saying, Mitch. Did any
No,
of
I mean, I get exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate your comments. I guess my main point is that sometimes we don't all agree on what's essential and what isn't essential in the text.
Yeah,
And sometimes I really feel that gets really in the way of us having any kind of discussion. Frankly, some people, if you were to discuss, like, for instance, the whole depravity thing, that is an essential piece of, uh, and what happens is that if you attack that, you're attacking a core belief that some people, it's a crisis of faith with some of those particular topics and subjects, and it's
yeah,
really hard to have discussions about them.
yeah, I totally agree. And sometimes when I'm grappling with similar like big issues, I look around and I'm like, who can I talk to this about? Because I just know that like some people are going to shut down automatically, um, and not listen to that viewpoint, or just go into like the answers that have just been built into them that they're supposed to respond. Like, oh, when somebody says this, you say this back to them, like all that history there.
Yeah,
Um,
I think Wade had his finger up.
oh, did you wait? I'm
Yeah.
so sorry.
It wasn't the recording finger. We're already doing that. No, it's just when you started and we're talking about, playing in the text or with the text, the image that came to my mind was like a sandbox. And definitely like it kind of tells you something about my childhood, but like my idea of play was always like imaginative play or creative play, and not so much like playing tag with someone or playing sports or something like that. But so this image of a sandbox where there are certain givens, like there are boundaries, there is sand, but but everything, like what we can do with the text is metaphorically, like sometimes just experiencing it, just letting it run through our fingers,
Mhm.
and kind of being it's not even like employing the imagination, it's just experiencing it um in a way that's not like engaging with it intellectually or imaginatively so much as it is just engaging it directly, but also kind of that creative things where you literally can build things in that sandbox, and you're moving things around, you're creating juxtapositions, you're saying, how does this part relate to this part? And when you move the sand, sometimes it stays there and sometimes it moves, independent of you. And so, that's just, when I think of playing in the text, like the creative parts that we add, like I wouldn't say those are part of the text, and those weren't put there by the assemblers of the text, the original authors of the text. But I think play helps us relate it to ourselves because it's taking our experiences and adding it to the text, so that it can be, applied, it can be more real. We can, there's a lot of people in the dust community that really like puns because that's playing with language. It's
Mhm.
like, oh, this word sounds like this word, but part of the delight of a pun is like not only taking the sounds and making them stand in relation to each other, but the looking at, well, what if the meanings were also, like what if it took the meaning as well as the sound, and doesn't that create a new picture for me? And so I think, in the text we're doing that a lot too, like this part of the text sounds like this part of the text, well, what was the meaning of this part? How does that fit with the meaning of this other part that sounds similar? So and I think this kind of goes to what Mitch was saying, is that there's a fundamental difference between people that have been told they're allowed to play with the text, and people that are told that is not this kind of text.
Yeah.
This is not a pop-up book. This is not a manipulatable. This is an owner's manual. um, you know, so like my mother, um, you know, she, you know, like both my parents were brought up at a time where, um, the text is the text. It's for you to learn from. It's for you to go to and find the part that applies to your current situation. And never mind that the cultures that it's talking about may not have had the situation that you are in, but or may have thought about it differently culturally, so like when I came out to her, and for the 15 years after that, that was like her biggest thing was, I'm not allowed to play with the text. I'm not allowed to hear what you say in relationship to the text uh, because the text, I've always been told the text said this, and there's no room for play. There's no room for application, and or to say, if this is an owner's manual, suddenly I'm troubleshooting something that's not in the manual, and so I have no way of troubleshooting it because I can't find the text that's going to tell me what the problem is and how to fix it. So
Yeah. Thank you, Wade. And Craig said in the chat, interpretations are awesome and necessary, but can also distort the original message. That's why I'm thankful for this group, because so many of you are hyper-focused on biblical literacy and cultural context. Any other thoughts before I go on? All right. So this big picture idea I kind of mentioned before that I've been thinking about is God's pursuit and God's love for his people. And it kind of started a while ago when I was looking at Genesis 12 and Genesis 15. Does anybody know what happens in Genesis 12, even in just like a couple of words off the top of your head? Genesis 12 is like a turning point in Genesis, the way I see it, because it's where we meet Abraham. So up to Genesis 12, we have creation and Cain and Abel and Noah and Ark and the Tower of Babel. In Genesis 12, we start to hone in on one person, on Abraham and his story. And it's kind of a nice place to start when you're thinking about the arc of Abraham and all of his descendants. And we're going to be talking about that arc of Abraham and his descendants and what they experience on their way to the promised land. And it starts off in Genesis 12. It says, the Lord said to Abram, go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And then in Genesis 15, we actually have the Abrahamic covenant where God actually enters into covenant with Abraham. And when I think of covenant, one of the real life like applications I think of or examples is the covenant of marriage. And so I was imagining, I was like, like God in pursuit of Abraham, almost like Genesis 12 is almost like the proposal, like leave your father and mother and come with me. And Genesis 15, when he enters into covenant, it's like, let's commit to each other. Let's sign this covenant. Let's do this thing. And God and Abraham are walking in that deep, intimate love that I think marriage can point to. Now, already just in this big picture idea, there might be things that are like popping up in your head, but I'm going to try to like go over the whole narrative and then offer feedback or open the floor again. But so then we move. So Abraham, he leaves his homeland, ends up in Canaan, and then we have the story of Abraham and his descendants, and going through the line of Isaac, Isaac marrying Rebecca. They have Jacob. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel, and then we have the 12 tribes, the 12 sons. And then you might be familiar with the story of his son Joseph, when his brothers throw him into slavery, or sell him into slavery, and Joseph ends up all the way in Egypt, which sets the stage for Joseph preparing for a famine, and then back to Jacob and his family. When they need food, they end up reuniting with Jacob in Egypt, and now suddenly Abraham's descendants are all in Egypt. And that remains the case for years and years. And even though Joseph was successful in his tenure in Egypt, time passed and people forgot about that, and the Israelites became enslaved. And so now they're stuck in slavery in Egypt. And I think of the slavery being like let me hold that thought. So then we have the Hebrew midwives saving the babies. So if we remember that little bit of scripture, that the Pharaoh wanted all the Israelite children to be Israelite males to be killed, and the Hebrew midwives said, well, or the midwives to the Hebrews said, well, the Hebrew women are so strong that they're having the babies, we can't kill them. And so then we have Moses coming on the scene, and his mother protecting him for as long as possible, and he ends up being what's called the deliverer of the people. And he goes back, all these plagues happen, and the plagues, they gradually intensify. So in this whole story, I kind of imagine that it's as if we're getting ready to birth the people of Israel. So playing with the text is like imagining, like just having fun and letting my mind explore this idea of pursuit in this like idea of marriage, but it's this big picture idea. And now we are in the pregnancy stage in my big picture idea. So we have the deliverer is coming. So now Moses is coming as the midwife to deliver the people. We have the labor, in when you're in labor, the labor pains intensify. Each plague intensified until the people are birthed out of Egypt. And there's actually discussion around this birthing imagery. I think it was Don who introduced me to this, that when you think of the Passover, and you think of the blood of the lamb over the doors, it can be somewhat graphic. So sorry if it's too much for you, but a graphic illustration of birthing out of the doors, the blood around the door. But birthing is a bloody experience. Birthing is a painful experience. And so this imagery of literally Israel birthing out of their homes, preparing for the Exodus, preparing to enter into the promised land eventually. And then they're wandering around the desert. They're in the desert and they're hungry. And what does a new baby do? What does a nursing baby do? A nursing baby needs a mother. And if they don't have a mother, they need a wet nurse, somebody else to nurse. This is before the days of formula and other options. And who provides for them? God provides for them. God provides, he provides the manna. And a nursing baby doesn't get to choose between steak and sushi and all these options. They get what they get. And pretty much for the first year of life, you're not supposed to give them anything else. So now we're wandering in the desert, and we're not wandering, but the people are wandering in the desert as infants, and they're sustained with manna. They're sustained with quail, and God is sustaining them. And then we have, and in this moment, I just like to stop and think about God as the mother. We think about God as father a lot, but God also is mother. I will be your mother. I will provide for you. I will meet your needs. They've come out of Egypt, and this is where I think the analogy doesn't quite work, because I was like, well, does that make Egypt the mother? But then I thought, well, they came out of Egypt. They came out of Egypt, and who provided for them? God. So we're not always what we come out of. We don't all have a beautiful mother story. We don't all have a loving or current relationship even with our maternal figures, but God steps in and provides for that. He provides the manna, he provides the nurturing, he provides the care that a mother would. And when you're nursing, you only provide enough for the baby. Like, you can't over nurse a child. It's biologically impossible. And the manna is the same way. It's only enough for that day. It's enough to meet their need until the next day, or when they have to store up for the Sabbath. And even Isaiah 49:15, I think of where it says, does a nursing mother forget her child? Does God forget us? A nursing mother's not going to forget her child. It's like, me as a nursing mother, just as a mother, any hint of a cry, and I'm like, internally, I'm like ready to respond to that. Sometimes even the dog next door whines, and I think it's like a baby crying, and I need to like respond to that. And some women even have a very biological or physiological reaction to, like, they'll be in a store and another baby's crying, and they're ready to nurse that baby. They're ready to step in. Their body's ready to step in, even if they have don't even know that baby. But the body physically responds as a mother in that caring, nurturing way, which I think is a really beautiful way to think about to think about God as mother, or God even specifically as a nursing mother. So all this leads to, why did I bring this up today? Well, last week and was actually the evening, I think, of last Sunday was the beginning of Shavuot. And a lot of times we like to look at these festivals and talk about them. And one of the things that's kind of been applied to Shavuot, the festival, over the years, is to celebrate the giving of the 10 Commandments. And so past this nursing stage, wandering in the desert, and the Israelites come to Mount Sinai. So in my analogy, in my playing of the text, I'm like, well, where is this in the story that of God's pursuit and God's love for his people? And I thought, what if the 10 Commandments are like the talk? Like, this is God, like, okay, it's time for us. We need to have the talk. And we hear about 10 Commandments a lot, but another way the translation can be considered is the 10 utterances. So if commandments is like a hang up for you, well, even if it's not a hang up for you, it can actually be referred to as the 10 utterances. And that's kind of where I want to land today, is thinking about these 10 utterances of this loving God who pursues Abraham in love, this family of people that gets birthed out, that he has provided for, and now he is giving the talk, or one of many talks, that to his people. And if you think about the 10 utterances, the 10 Commandments, and you were to read them as if it were a mother, or as if it were a father, or as if it were a lover, or as if it were a spouse talking, how would that change what we hear in the 10 Commandments? So that was a lot. I want to open the floor now for some thoughts on that. And then I want to sit with the 10 utterances for a little while after that. Wade said Torah as rom-com, the wacky meet cute, Trouble in Paradise, the crazy misunderstanding, the coincidental reunion. And Craig said, I always think of manna as pita chips. Oh, Wade, the DTR, defining the relationship. So if we think back to how I was kind of preferencing this conversation, obviously this is my interpretation of playing in the text. And if we take my analogy too specific, it can fall apart. But in those moments, like, for example, I was like, when I was trying to go specific, and I'm like, well, that makes Egypt the mother, and that seems weird. But I think that there's still truth that can be gleaned from that, because of that idea that our family of origin is not, it's part of our story, but it's not the end of the story. And we can come out of our family of origin and find God providing for us, and finding other people providing for us, and meeting our needs in a beautiful way. So, any thoughts on that? Any of that? Don, did you unmute?
Yeah, I unmuted.
Okay.
Um, so one of the things that when you talk about that, like the conversation or whatever, though I don't have a whole lot of space to talk about it, Israel being an oppressed nation, and Israel being, if we just think about history, when you called it the talk, I thought about my Black friends who they speak about having the talk with their kids about how to be safe in this world, because the world is not safe for them. And that put the 10 utterances in an interesting light for me, that in some way this is God having the talk with his children about how the world is going to be unsafe for them, and how to navigate the world. Show your hands at all times when pulled over by a police officer, have your, all these things that are a part now of the common discussions for families of color when their child becomes old enough to be out and about by themselves or with friends. And I don't know, that just really struck me as kind of that God has always been having the talk with God's people in these spaces. And I think the danger is we could then apply it to ourselves, particularly the white folks in this conversation, apply it to ourselves and be like, God is telling us how to be safe in this world that's against us. And I don't think that's a fair way to hear that. But when God is speaking to Israel, they are fleeing slavery. They are being pursued. They are in the wilderness where other nations are wanting to destroy them. They're not safe. But God's like, here are the ways in which you can be safe in this world. I don't know. It just really struck me. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the way it impacts me is thinking about how God is saying to the people that I am the Lord your God, reminding them who he is and his faithfulness to bring them out of slavery, and that the fourth commandment is giving them permission to rest when they've been in bondage for so many years. That is going to be a total different life change for them to maybe possibly even feel worthy of rest, and worthy of that pause, and not working, not being enslaved. And that's one of the things that comes out, that God thinks of, this is going to be one of the 10 things, the first 10 things that I'm going to say to help these people as they move towards safety, towards salvation, towards freedom. Any other thoughts? Wade said in the chat, I think too, God is always telling God's children to remember that I chose you. I think a lot of times we think we don't deserve our partners and forget that they chose us. Wow, that's beautiful. Wade, thank you. So if we look at the 10 utterances, if you want to actually look at Exodus 20, you can, or I'll read through the 10 utterances. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's sin to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the foreigner who is within your gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Honor your father and your mother so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And Mitch in the chat said, when Israel was enslaved, they didn't have the freedom to play. They didn't know how to. I think the same thing still occurs today. We've never had permission to play, so we often don't know how. Wow, I totally agree, Mitch. I even find like in my own, like trying to apply Sabbath concepts in my life and my family, Sabbath rolls around and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I mean, there are some things that just can't be undone, like diapers still have to be changed, but how do we incorporate that rest and that play and the delight in creation that I think that God intended for us?
You know, this is the context on this right now. For me is interesting. I'm actually doing a grant-funded program at the zoo called Play Naturally North Toledo, where I'm working with kids in the North Side in nature play, basically introducing kids to self-directed, free play where there are no rules. I mean, there are things regarding safety, but the play is self-directed by children where the adults, I train basically adults to let go and let the kids direct their own play without making rules. And I could go into a whole series of different stuff on this. There's a lot of research now that shows how important self-directed play is with children in terms of social, emotional, cognitive development. It takes the parents a while to get the idea of letting their children play without boundaries beyond just safety, so you won't like kill yourself. So again, just the context of this has given me a lot to think about with regards to that. Is that kind of like what I said in the chat? We often don't know how to play, and we don't know how to let others play. So anyway, just dwelling on that.
That's amazing, Mitch, and I'm so excited to hear about that. I read a book that kind of compiled some of the research about that like what preschoolers really need to know, I think was the title or something along those lines, about how just the play is so important, and really like ideal preschool setup would be the teachers just alongside the child observing the play and maybe interacting in the smallest amount, but that so much of our society wants to see. One of the chapters is the hand turkey craft. It's like parents and administrators, they want to see them come home with a craft, right, basically the teacher had to do for them. It's not developmentally appropriate or anything. But the society drive for like, oh, we want a classroom with bright colors and all this stuff on the walls and that's really not what the kids need. But while you were talking and thinking of Don's piece about having the talk and people being enslaved, it just made me think that like one of the things that children must need to be able to play freely is to know that they're safe.
Right, right. I mean, that, and that is, I mean, when you look at the utterances, those are the boundaries to keep you safe, but you play within those boundaries. And that's the, and that's an amazing piece. I want to give you just a quick example, one of my favorite play experiences. And I've been working on this program now for several years, and I partnered with the Metro Parks and 577 Foundation. We did a play event at Swan Creek Metro Park in April. It was really, really cold out, but the parents on some of these children had gotten the idea, and they were actually letting their kids balance on logs through the flooded forest at Swan Creek and falling into water. And it was like 28 degrees out that day. But what they had learned over time is that the parents brought a change of clothes for their kids. They brought coverings for their cars so they wouldn't track mud and stuff in their cars. And they brought like hot chocolate and stuff for the kids, but the kids wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And some parents gave them permission to do that. And I remember there was a dad with a little girl, like probably 6 or 7, who was looking at the kids and she wanted to do that. And the parents said, absolutely not, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, just swirling all around how important it is, again, like you just said, that you set the safety, the boundary, the fence. Here's the fence. You can play anywhere you want inside that fence. But the fence is there for your safety, kind of like what you were mentioning, but that opens up a whole world of freedom to play. And, you know, carrying that analogy out, I don't feel like a lot of us Christians get that. It's almost going back to the 613 laws. Okay, so you have all of these additional laws, and of course they're there, but you know, these 10 are the basic boundaries.
Yeah. And Wade had said in the chat, I think that the utterances define the edges, walls of a sandbox, but we forget that the implication that there is freedom within those boundaries, and that these are walls of constraint, but walls of safety.
Yes. Yeah. And actually we look at it as God being kind of like the angry parent versus what Wade just said.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, it's just flipping that whole idea of who God is in our minds. And it's been really unfortunate, but I mean, that's what I grew up as, thinking that God just mad at us all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Don has his hand up.
But this also goes back to trauma. You know, so if you are traumatized by authority figures, then you don't know how to play is hard, and anyone who has authority is not there to create safety for you. They're there to enforce more trauma on you.
Yeah, and even like I just wanted to say what I was saying right before Mitch was responded. I needed to clarify a step further where I was going with the safety thing and with Don and the talk, because I think, and this is me just imagining because I'm not in the scenario, but I think that there must be children in the world who can't relax and play because basic needs are not met. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're worried about where their mom is, or what, or where their dad is, or what's happening in their family. Maybe they're carrying those burdens, and that's part of the safety too, that to be able to, I mean, I guess this is so not on the same level of children dealing with that, but like in my personal life, why I struggle with the Sabbath is letting go of the to-dos. And most of my to-dos are not life or death or whether I'm going to eat my next meal. But, you know, for kids like who carry that burden, it has to be harder for them to find safety to be able to play, but probably even more important.
Yeah, I mean, it's basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Don.
Oh, it's okay. You know, the conversation around play, a while ago, I read a a book on evolution, and it talked about that the most advanced species in the world are those that play the longest into the furthest into adolescence, right? And so dolphins play for a very long time, humans play, dogs play, right? And that the longer into adolescence or the longer into life that a person plays, or a species plays, the more advanced they become. And I just think that that's such a important thing, because if we take that and we think that if there is truth to that, which I believe there is, then even with our faith, what does that mean? A faith that allows us to play well into the maturing part of our faith, that allows us to be playful, not take ourselves too seriously, but instead to enjoy what is being offered up in the world of theology, in the world of faithfulness, and to get to do that and experience that. And I just think that in a culture today where we, Mitch kind of touched on it, like we move kids away from play so fast, and we call little kids like little men, or you're the man of the house, or and we use language of adulthood for children. And I think we do the same thing in faith. And I just wonder how many of us have had our faith lives, so to speak, stunted because play has been eliminated from part of our story, if not completely from our story of faithfulness.
Yeah. And honestly, it's a huge motivation for why I homeschool Abby, because we can get our schoolwork done in an hour and a half a day. And she has so much more time for play. And it's one of the things that like I most admire and love about Glenn is his love for play and adventure. Because when I can get stuck in the to-dos, he's always focusing on that. And even right now, like I think he's listening in on the discussion, and he'll try to listen in on the discussion. But like Glenn, like I'm the teacher who's like sitting here talking to you, but he is like a walking sermon if you watch him interacting with children, and the love and the attention and the play and the adventure and the encouraging of ideas that he creates, that safe place. And just last weekend he got to go to the zoo with a couple of other dads, and I mean, I know he's my husband and I'm supposed to be his biggest fan, but like I was grateful that other people just got to rub shoulders with him and watch him interact with kids, because I think he just naturally, I mean, it's not just natural, he's intentional, but like creates that safe place for play and adventure and creativity. And I think it's why Abby has won the creative story contest 2 years in a row, is him cultivating this creative play and adventure. And I love that Mitch's playing introduces us to joy, the joy of living in life. Yes, and I think that reminded me of when learning about, like, in the church we were involved with in Queens, had a big emphasis on people trying to incorporate Sabbath more intentionally into their life. And one of the 4 aspects that they honed in on is delight, that part of Sabbath should be delighting in God's creation, and paying attention to what brings you joy and happiness, because that's not a mistake, that it's not like a sin that we have to apologize for, that we really enjoy coffee or whatever it might be, but that those moments of things that delight us can actually bring us closer to God, because he created us and these things that we can delight in. And then Wade, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to go down the Zoom chat, so if you wanted to say something to that, please.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Wade said, I think when we move from milk to meat, a la Paul's letter, we think we leave play behind in our faith. Yeah. Craig said, it's hard to find people to trust, especially when you're older. Yes, that can definitely be true. And Craig also said, Glenn is one of the best people in the world who you might never know about. That's true.
You know, one of the things, and yeah, this is something you guys probably don't know about me, but I work a lot with BGSU. We actually do research on play. Okay, so what goes on with kids in play? And one of the things that's interesting as I sit here and listen to this conversation is actually playing is practicing life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what you're doing. All right, so like one of my favorite spots at the zoo is to go to the stream in nature's neighborhood because that's set up specifically for kids to do free self-directed play and to give them what we call loose parts, basically to invent whatever they want to in that stream. And one of the things that we have discovered in our research is that there's a lot of like science process and all sorts of things going on. So cause and effect. So if I do this, then this will happen. We all need to learn more about cause and effect. Okay, not only like the bad things about cause and effect, like if I do this stupid thing, this is going to be the effect, but good things that happen from cause and effect. So play is like a laboratory where we learn about how life works. And we often take that away from ourselves and away from, if we're a member of the church, if we're a pastor of a church, our congregants, okay, learning how life works, so to speak. You know, you have the basic boundaries, but holy smokes, just giving people the freedom to just live and to explore life. We're just so hung up on sin and doing the wrong things that we just don't give people freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when Meadow fell off the piano bench a couple weeks ago, and she was complaining a lot about it hurts, and different times she would say it hurts. And then in the course of the next 2 days, I saw her playing with her little figurines, and her figurines got hurt. And she was like, just in her little limited language, talking about like the hurt feelings and playing it out with her figurines. And there's been moments I've seen that like with Abby too, like just taking reality and imagination and working things out through playing with whatever figurines happen to be nearby. So whoever would be willing to share, what are some things that you do in your life to play, or if you had the time, or do you hope to do more of, that brings a spirit of play into your heart, even as adults? Craig is showing us your play. Is that right? I think we got a video answer here. Craig's panning around. Watching, is it football? Yeah, it looks like football. No, soccer?
Yeah, English
Liverpool,
football.
yeah.
No fair. I can't talk about sports when I'm teaching. No fair.
Well, as an adult, I actually do play video games because I can relate to a lot of what Don shared. Like when I was growing up, I didn't get to play a lot, and I had to worry about a lot of things that Don mentioned. So like as an adult, I remember things that I didn't get to do or that I did, but not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually gives me a lot of peace. Yeah, that's about it.
That's awesome, Darnell. Thank you.
Why have so many board games, Darnell?
Yeah, we do board games, video games, Monopoly, Treble, Sorry. We got Super Mario, Donkey Kong. Yeah, it all.
Yeah, one of my favorite ways of playing, I just like to get out on my kayak, like on the river. You know, it's restorative for me just to be in kind of solitude in the river, in nature. That's my ideal. I just love doing that.
That's awesome. I think bike riding is a big one for me because I love to bike ride as a kid, and getting back on a bike and just biking around. And now that Abby can bike by herself and Meadow can go in the seat behind me, we can bike at any time during the day. We can manage with just the three of us. So
That's actually something I'm hoping to do more of, and like maybe actually like incorporate it into the day. It's hard for me with bicycles with my chronic illness, because it's possible I could ride out somewhere and then get stuck because I don't have the energy to come back.
yeah,
So we're actually looking into an electrical assist so that it kind of opens up an avenue of play for me, if that makes sense, like without
yeah,
worry of, oh, it's too hot, so I'm going to pass out or whatever. But yeah, I think that the whole thing of play as adults, it's just so like, it really is kind of almost like, that's the thing you do when you're a kid, right? And even like you all were talking about, like there's these rules we put on kids of like how you can play, right? So, I mean, I know there's that, but like growing up, we were, using the typical, well, back in my day, we just left, my parents didn't know where I was for hours on end. And we lived in a neighborhood that backs up to the woods. And so my neighbor and I would just go play in the woods, and we would build forts, and we would eat honeysuckle, and, and we would do all sorts of things. And it's just sad to me that it feels like, all that imagination and everything for me, even though like in a way play was still a part of my life, the older I got, it was almost like play became work, or obligatory in some way, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Because in my world growing up, it was, all the things you do for play, quote unquote, in school are to make you look better for colleges.
yeah,
And so a lot of things I did because I enjoyed, but it was also like, like you need to be really well-rounded. And it was like, that's how everybody in my high school was. It was like everybody trying to do everything and be the best at everything, because, it was like this preparation. And so it was almost like an obligation. So even the things that were fun at some points became like almost like a chore. I don't know how to explain that, but
yeah,
and so it felt like there was like a progression from childhood through high school and then into college and then early adulthood, where it was like everything became more and more obligatory, until we got to the point where, because of our financial circumstances, Don and I would each be working like 2 or 3 jobs, and then it was like, what's play?
yeah,
And so at this point, it's like I spend so much time working, and I'm so task driven, like you were saying, Sarah, like you're like, I have my to-dos, like I have to do my tasks, that I can get focused on that, and it'll be like, I'll take a break for dinner, and then I'll be like, well, I really should do this other work, because it's like you're never done at work, right?
yeah,
And then if it's not that, it's, I need to pick up this thing for Malcolm, or take the dog to the vet, or do this thing. And so it feels like play has just gotten crowded out by what feels like obligations, but also like I would probably have a better, actually be like, have a better like balance, and maybe even be still perfectly fine with my work, like, and maybe even in some ways more attentive at work or something, if I balanced things better and had moments of play more
yeah.
often. So anyway, sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but the bike thing I'm thinking about, and I still have all the painting supplies I purchased, and I'm hoping to maybe do some more of that. But breaking away from the obligation part is so difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, for me, being with the girls so much a part of my day, it's like, well, every moment could be play, and then nothing ever gets done. And it helps me if I can be mentally intentional, kind of going back a couple weeks ago when I was talking about being present. it's like for me deciding like, okay, this is a chunk of time where I'm playing and I'm not thinking about everything else I could be doing. I'm not trying to sneak in little to-dos while I'm playing with the girls and things like that. And when you're talking about the electric assist, it just made me think like that's like a way for your play to feel safe. Like you can't, like you have, like that's a wonderful example of like sometimes even as adults we need to set up safety boundaries so that we can relax and play. You know, for me, like if I take the girls to a playground, I need to know that there's a bathroom nearby in case I need to go to the bathroom. And that's like a need being met so that like we can relax and be in the play.
Well, that's a thing I have. It's something I've been trying to focus on. Is this not? I have a difficult time being present, no matter what I'm doing or where I am, because my mind is always going on all the other things that need to be done. So even when I have those moments of quote unquote play, you know, it's like, oh, well, I still have this to do and this to do and this to do, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's part of like why vacations are nice when like you're removing yourself and you can't get some to-dos done. I mean, technology now makes that kind of a little bit messier, or like you're focused on that time together. So I try to mentally like flip into that sometimes with the girls, like, okay, this is what we're doing. Even if we're in the front yard, we're playing, and yeah, try to be intentional. And I love the chat. There's a whole list of things here that people do to find joy and to play: porch drinking, singing, talking with people I admire, board games, cornhole, biking, electric unicycle, brewing beer, kayaking, running, photography, bird watching, hiking. We've been conditioned by idle hands are the devil's workshop. That's really powerful, Mitch. And then Mitch, I was thinking of this too, as Tana was sharing, that like, yeah, sometimes our volunteering at work or at church can turn into more of an obligation than play. Like Sue, her love of music, playing at the church became work, and she stopped playing because she felt obligated to play music. And I think that like there's, yeah, I was thinking just like even back to like the greeting at the door, like that can be a really like playful, wonderful thing until it starts to feel like an obligation and turns into an obligation, or even like guilt about not being at church. Like we come here on Sundays and discuss the Bible and connect with each other, and hopefully nobody feels shamed when they can't make it. But when you have that shame factor added and the obligation factor, it just kind of takes some of the joy out of it. And Craig said, when food for thought became a job for me, I stopped. And I would encourage everybody, like I didn't really anticipate the conversation going this far in the direction of play, but I absolutely love it and support it 100,000%. But it reminds me of so many discussions around Sabbath at my previous church and with Glenn and I, as we tried to incorporate it. And I would encourage everybody to see Sabbath as a gift of play that God has given us, and whatever that looks like for you. And I mean, incorporating Sabbath into our lives for Glenn and I has been such a journey. Like it's, you know, ups and downs and trying things out, because like how much structure do you put on so it feels like you accomplished the Sabbath, which is exactly like what you're not supposed to do. So how do you like, sometimes we've gone through and made lists of like things that bring us delight, just like what I see in the chat, and things that we want to try to avoid for 24 hours, a 24-hour period once a week. Things that bring us delight, that bring us closer to God, and incorporating that like into what a Sabbath might look like for you. And the idea of Sabbath, like when I think about Sabbath in an, again, a big picture, like idealistic type of way, it's like having a weekly Sabbath can inform the rest of the week, because you're practicing that idea of presence and delight. And then in theory, and I've seen this happen in my life, not always perfectly, but it seeps into everything else, bringing delight and play even into your work. And I think the play can be part of that too. Like when we purposefully play, or when we play, it can seep into all the other areas of our life. I remember too, like one of the ways this seeped into like office meetings at New Life, the church we went to in Queens, is at the middle of the meeting, they would stop and put like a song on, and everybody had to get up and just like dance to the song, and like, and that's all I really know about it. But they would just like stop and like have a break to play and joy, even in like have joy, even in the midst of like a long drawn out, like maybe typically boring meeting. And Mitch said, I remember when Don gave Cindy Newton permission to step down from organizing the Sunday Children's Ministry at New Harvest after 20 years. Oh man, that reminds me of something I saw online. Oh, it was said so well. And now I'm not going to remember it. Maybe I'll find it. But something about the idea that this false notion that like, because you've invested a ton of money or a ton of time into something, that you should always continue with it. And man, it was said so much better, that, or sometimes we feel tied to it because like a lot of resources, whether be it money or time, are tied into something. And then
well, it's also the sunk cost fallacy.
yes, that's it.
Yeah,
okay. That's the first time I heard of it, but thank you. Wade saves the day again.
Well, it's not only that, but it's also often oh, that's your spiritual gift, so you're letting down God if you don't use it, kind of a deal.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts before we move into prayer requests?
Yeah, you know what? I just got permission from Sue to read something she posted on Facebook yesterday. She just showed it to me. I didn't even see this, but I think this is awesome. I'll give my wife kudos.
Yay.
So she says, treated myself to some kindness this morning. I went to the park to journal and meditate. Instead, I noticed some old rusty, creaky swings. It's as if the swings wanted someone to come and play with them, so I obliged. I started acting like I was 6 instead of 60, seeing how high I could swing, getting the swing to bounce, you know, all the stuff you did as a kid. Then I noticed how much better my butt fit, or should I say, felt in the swing. OMG. I wanted to swing higher, forget journaling, forget meditation. This was my journaling. This was my meditation, higher, higher. Then I started feeling kind of woozy in the stomach, and a reminder of exactly how old I was. Time to get off. And no, I didn't jump. I'm curious, how do you show your body kindness?
Oh, that's so perfect with what we've been talking about. I love that. Thank you, Mitch. That was
something about what she said of like, she was like, oh, you know, forget journaling or meditation. This is my journal. You know, it's funny how even in our play times, there's that should factor of like what it should look like. And so she was, you know, in that moment, probably thinking, oh, I should meditate or I should do journaling. Nope. Which I'm really glad that she's let that go. But that made me think of that, like that we also have that should thing hanging over us in everything, which can also interrupt play. I should be doing this. I should be doing that.
Yeah, my a while back, my therapist used to call that shooting on yourself.
Yeah. It reminds me of the quote, like, the glory of God is a human being that's fully alive. And it just like brings tears to my eyes to just imagine God looking down on Sue and like, how awesome. Like, I would just think that like, that brought God so much happiness to see her so happy. And like, I'm sure she would not wanted us all to be flies on the wall, but like, I wish we all could have been flies on the wall to see her happiness. And like, or maybe she would, I shouldn't say, I'm sure she wouldn't. That's just a phrase to fill in the blanks. I didn't really mean that, but like, yeah, to see that happiness and that abandon and joy, like I'm inspired just imagining it. And I was going to say that before, thank you, Tana, but I was going to say before Tana came in that like, that was our closing prayer, that Facebook post. And Craig had said, there are so many opportunities to donate your time and love to people. Don't make it a job. Movement is a meditation for so many, including many neurodivergent folks. Thank you, Wade. Yep. And then Tana saying, I feel like I should meditate because so many people say I should, but I really hate it. Yeah, I think like the spiritual disciplines, they're like, they should just be viewed as tools, and not every tool is going to get the job done. If it's not getting the job done for you, then maybe try something else. Meditating's not it, then get on the swings, so to speak. All right. Well, I will pray. I feel like I would like to pray to close us out, and we'll transition into prayer requests. So God, I just thank you for your great love. I thank you for your creation, that you have created us in your image, and that part of that image is delight and play and beauty. And I would ask that you would help open our eyes and ears and hearts and hands to catch moments of play, even today, even this week, that we can rest in your great love and feel safety and create safety for others so that they can play and experience you and experience the world and experience joy. Amen.